Okay, we're up to DAF Lamates at the Mishnah, line number 1 of the page. This page is going to be talking about mar.
Do you know about your lettuce?
Eli rakais. These are the vegetables. These are the vegetables that a person can fulfill his obligation of mar on Pesach. There's chazeras, betamcha, bechachavina, beulshin, ubemar. These are the 5 types. The mar is going to translate what they mean in Aramaic to help you out. And you'll be yotzi your obligation whether they're moist or dry. But if they have been pickled, they don't work. If they've been overcooked. Rashi said they've been so overcooked until they disintegrate. Yeah, they crumble, they're disintegrated. And not if they're cooked. So you're able to take all 5 types of mar and combine them to 1 kazais, and you're yotzi your obligation with 1 kazais. And you're also yotzi if you just use the stalk. Instead of using the leaves, use the stalk. That also works. Ubedamai. Damai means damai. What is this? Damai means that it's a suffix if the trumas and maises have been taken off. Ubemaisa rishon shnitla trumasai, or the maisa rishon, but the truma has been taken off by the Levi. Umaiser sheni v'haktish sheniftu, and also maiser sheni and haktish that has been redeemed. You're able to use the mar from these items for mar. So the Gemara is now going to translate what these items are. So chazeras, that was the first item in the Mishnah, is chasa. Chasa is the lettuce. I'm assuming it's probably romaine lettuce. Ulshin is hindivi, endives. Tamcha. So Amar Rabbi Babarchana, that's tamachta, which is some type of bitter herb. Tamachta shma. Then there's chavina. So Amar Shimon ben Lakish, asafsva dedikla. This is the vine. This is a type of vine that grows around the decal, goes around the palm tree, and it's bitter. And you could fulfill your obligation with mar with this vine. And the last one is marar, which is mirirta, which is again a bitter herb. Tani Bar Kapar. So Bar Kapar says, he gives another listing. The Brisa gives a few extra. Always the Brises usually give a few more than what the Mishnah does. Gives a few extra items. These are the vegetables a person can fill his obligation of mar on Pesach with. There is beulshin. Then there is betamcha, bachachalin, bachachavinin, ubechazerin. And Rabbi Yehuda adds, Omer, af ulshe sada, ulshe gina v'chazer. So you can also fulfill your obligation with these additional 3. So Gemara asks right away, ulshe gina v'chazeres hatani le'reisha. He says the second and third item of ulshe gina and chazeres was already mentioned in the Tanakama, because the Tanakama said just a line earlier, if you want to look back, Kapar says these are the vegetables, and he mentions ulshin, and he also mentions chazirin. So the Mar answer. So the Mar says Hachi Kamar. Af ulshe sada ulshe gina v'chazeres. We're adding only 1, and the one we're adding is ulshe sada, and we're saying the ulshe sada is like. You have to add in that like. It's like the ulshe gina and the chazeres, which are also permissible, as we mentioned in the Reisha. Remeir Omer af asfas v'tura or marior. Also, these 3 items of asfas, tura, marior also works. So Amalei Rabbi Yossi. So Rabbi Yossi defines the Reisha. He says asva v'tura echadu. He says the first and second item of asva v'tura are really just 1. Asva v'tura is 1 vegetable. Umar zehu you are. When he says mar you are, that's also 1 item. Mar you are is 1 item.
We haven't come to horseradish yet.
Pardon me?
We haven't come to horseradish yet.
You know what? Some say that the tamcha is horseradish, but you can look in the art scroll. I think I saw some say tamcha is horseradish. Yeah. Which one? Chazeras? Yeah, the chazeras is the lettuce. So I think that's the romaine. Yeah. Tanidue Shmuel. These are the vegetables a person will fulfill his obligation with. There's b'chazeres, as we have already a few times, b'ulshin, u'b'tamcha, b'chavinin, b'charginin, u'b'hardefunin. Rabbi Yehuda says, af chazeres yulin v'chazeres galin. Also, these other types of lettuces, the chazeres yulin and the chazeres galin, you also will fulfill your obligation. Rabbi Lo Ama Mishum Rabbi Eliezer Af Akabalin. Also akabalim osur. That's perfect for mar. Chazarti al kol tamidav, and I went to all of my students. Ubekashti li chaver, and I was trying to find a chaver, meaning as someone else that would agree with me that akabalin could be used for mar. But I couldn't find any support. When I came in front of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, which we know Eliezer ben Yaakov, all of his teachers were kav and naki. They're very small in number. Whenever he passed in Allah, it was very pure. We knew it was a very strong support. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, he agreed to me. So that's an extremely strong support. Okay. So now we're going to go on a little bit of the definition, a little bit of the categories of what a mar vegetable should have within it. So Rabbi Yehuda Omer kol sheyesh lo sraf. Rabbi Yehuda says a mar vegetable has a sraf, has some type of sap inside of it. Rabbi Yochanan ben Baruka Omer kol shepanav machsifin. He says it's not so green. It's like a lighter type of color,
pale green,
like a pale green. That's one of the signs that this is a proper mar vegetable. Acherim Oimrim kol yerek mar yesh lo yisraf upan machsifim. The Acherim says it has both. It has a sap, and it also has a pale green color. And Amar Vahuna halacha kachem. So Vahuna said the halacha is like Acherim. So these would be the two signs of what a kosher mar would be. It has a lightish green, and it also has a sap, and probably it should be bitter too. Ravina ashkechelo of acha brei derava. So this is a good story. Ravina found that Rav Acha was searching for like even more bitter herbs. We had all the ones in the Mishnah, but it wasn't bitter enough. So he wanted to be machmer to find the bitterest herb. So he's looking for extremely bitter herb. So Amalei, my daitcha. What are you thinking? That you're going to find something which is more bitter? But chazeres time, we learned in the Mishnah that you're supposed to use chazeres, which is lettuce. If you eat the romaine lettuce, it doesn't seem so bitter. The reason why chazeres is bitter is because it says soifa at the end of it. If you leave it too long, it eventually becomes bitter. That's why it's mar. But if you eat it while it's fresh, it's not bitter. He says, but we said in the Mishnah chazeres. We also have the brisa from the yeshiva of Shmuel, which says we're supposed to use chazeres. Amar of Oishia mitzvah bechazeres. And why is it a mitzvah chazeres? So we're going to explain in a moment. Amar Rava, my chazeres. What is chazeres? That's chasa. That's lettuce. And what's the mitzvah with lettuce? My chasa, the chaser chmane Allah. Because there's like a remez over there that Hashem had mercy on us. That's why it's an Indian to DAF use the chasa. Yeah. So Amar Rab Shmuel bar Nachmeni Rabbi Yonasan. Lama nimshul mitzrayim kamar. Why are the mitzrayim compared to marar? So that's loy melacha. This is to tell you, ma mar zesh tichlase rach b'seif kasha. Just like this mar, at the beginning it's soft, but eventually it becomes hard. Af mitzrayim tichlase rach b'seif kasha. At the beginning the mitzrayim were soft, and they became very hard. What does that mean? Because they used to pay us for the slavery that we did. We're more like indentured servants. At the end, we became pure slaves with no rights and no pay. Okay. Amrlei Hadribi, he's like, you're right, I take it back, I'm not going to do any more searching for more bitter herbs. So Amrlei Rav Rechumi La'abaya. My dahai mar min yerku. So now we're going to get in, we're assuming the whole time that mar is a type of vegetable. So he says, how do you know that's even a vegetable? So he gave two signs, it have to have sap, and it has to be lightish green, but now we're saying maybe it's not even a vegetable. So maybe it means tukufia, it's the bitterness of the kufia, which is a type of fish, which is the gallbladder of a fish, which name was kufia, which was quite bitter. So he says because it's in the pasuk we have matzah and mar miachlu, so it needs to be dumi or the matzah, it needs to be similar to matzah. Ma matzah gdule karka, af mar gdule karka. It has to be something which grows from the ground, just like mar grows from the ground. So that excludes fish. So ve'ema hirduf, which is that hirduf was the branch. It says if you remember the story from Chumash that when they came to Mara, the waters of Mara were bitter. So Moshe took a stick and threw it in. So the stick that he took was called hirduf, which was also a bitter stick. So it was a nes b'toichnes. It was two miracles because he took a bitter stick and he threw it into bitter waters and it became sweet. So maybe you could use the hirduf from Mara. So dumi the matzah. So again, it needs to be similar to matzah. Ma matzah minzroim, af mar minzroim. It has to be like matzah, which comes from a seed. Also, mar needs to be a type of seed. Ve'ema harzifu, which is a type of seed which is a poisonous to animals. So, Dumya matzah. Ma matzah shenikachas bekesef meiser. So it's just like matzah needs to be acquired, or able to be acquired with meiser money. Af mar shenikach bekesef meiser needs to be something which is bought with meiser money, and zufu is not bought with meiser money because it's not a pre-meichel. And one of the conditions of kesef meiser needs to be a fruit which is able to be eaten. But these are not considered a edible type of fruit. Right? Because it says in the pasuk it needs to be similar to yain, v'sheicher, bakar, v'tzayin. So anything that a person would want to eat which is similar to these items, that would be included. So not harzifu. Omerle rabba barachan labaya. So ema mar chad. Let us say that there's only one species of mar. We said in the Mishnah 5, and the Bryce had included more species of mar. Maybe it's only one type. He says because it says in the pasuk mararing siv, which is plural. So ema mararing trey. Maybe it only means two. It says dumid matzah, matzah minim harbe, if mar minim harbe. Just like matzah, there's many types. Also mar, there's many types. So we're seeing that hekesh of matzah mar is a very strong hekesh. We're learning many halachas of matzah mar michlu is that's an important pasuk which teaches us many rules and really defines what mar is. Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna Amar Rav Yerakish Amru Chachamim. All the vegetables that a person fulfills his obligation that the Chaim told us about, kulam nizroim baruga achas. All of these types of vegetables are able to be planted in one patch of farmland. So a ruga is actually 6 by 6 tvachim. So you're able to plant all of these species in the Mishnah, the 5 that we mentioned, in one plot of land, one patch of land. So the Mar asks right away, the Lamemra, is this to say the less Shum Kalayim? You always have the rule of Kalayim. You can't plant different species together. So are you trying to say that? But Mesav Rabba has a shaila. It says chazeres galin. These two types of vegetables. Ulshin, and then there's ulshe sada. Krishin, which I think are leeks. Krishe sada. What are they?
Leeks.
They are leeks, yeah. Krishe sada. And the other type of leeks? Coriander. Kuzbar.
Mustard.
What's kuzbar? What's kuzbar? Coriander. Kuzbar.
Kuzbar is coriander.
Kuzbar sada, coriander. Two different types of coriander. Chardal. V'chardal mitzri. This is again two types of mustard seeds. But the lasa mitzri v'humusa, which is two types of gourds. Einam kalayim zabazah. They are not considered kalayim one with the other. So what do we see? That chazeres v'chazeres in. Chazeres v'ulshan lai, that you're able to put two different types of chazeres together, but you're not allowed to put the chazeres and the ulshan together because there would be kalayim. V'chi tema kuli ba'dadi k'tanilhu. And if you're going to say that this brisa that Rabbi brought, when it says you're not kalayim with each other, it doesn't mean just like the groups are not kalayim with each other. It means all of these different types of vegetables are able to be planted with each other. V'amar Rav zugais katani. We're mentioning them in groups to tell us that each group by itself could be planted together, but not that each group could be planted. All the groups separately could be planted with each other. So we have the question still remains. You're not able to plant them together. So mine is Roy and Damarav. So the Mar explains, what does it mean when Rav says they can be planted together? It means nizroin kihilchasan. They can be planted halacha together, which we're going to say that means is you have 5 species, so you put each one on one of the different directions. So you have one on each direction, and then one in the center. Pardon me?
One on a perimeter.
On the perimeters. You can put each one on each perimeter and one in the center. That's the halacha. So where it says, yeah, but kihilchas and tzinina. We already learned in the Mishnah that you're allowed to plant them kahalacha, because it says in the Mishnah. This is a Mishnah in Kalayim. Aruga shisha al shisha tvachim. If you have a patch of farmland which is 6 by 6 tvachim, zorim b'toicha chamisha zeroinin. You're able to plant within this aruga 5 seeds. Arba ruchais. You're able to have 4 on the 4 perimeters of the aruga. But achas b'emsel, you can have 1 in the center. So what's Rav telling us? That you're able to take 5 species of mar and plant them in this aruga. We have a Mishnah in Kalayim that tells us the same thing. So the Gemara explains, Mao the same Hani Mili Bizroim. If I would have just had the Mishnah and Kalayim, I would have thought that only applies to seeds. Aval b'yiraka is loy. But when it comes to vegetables, these halachas will not apply. Kamash malan, that even by yirakas, you are allowed to plant them in this fashion. So Gemara asks, remember the yirakas alim mizraim? Is this to tell us that yirakas is more strict than zraim? Meaning is in the Mishnah in the Mishnah and Kalayim it only told us zraim. So Rab tells us, not only by zraim, I'll tell you a bigger chiddush, even by vegetables. But we're going to bring down a Mishnah that tells us that regarding the halachas of Kalayim, zraim is more stringent. The halachas regarding zraim are more stringent than the halachas regarding yirakas. So again, if we have zraim are okay, for sure the yirakas should be okay, and we don't need to have Rab to tell us that yirakas are mutter to plant, kahalacha. Vatnan, kol minei zraim, ein zraim ba'aruga achas. All types of zraim, you are not allowed to. All types of zraim, you're not allowed to plant in the aruga. So we mentioned earlier that you're allowed to have 5 zraim in one aruga. He says it doesn't apply to every single species of zraim. But call me yirakas zraim ba'aruga achas. Well, all types of yirakas you could plant in one aruga. So we see clearly that yirakas is more lenient. So Mar explains, what was Rab telling us? Man, to say hani mar min zraim ninhu. I would have thought that mar is a type of zera, and this mar would have been one of the types of zera which wouldn't have been able to be planted in one aruga. Kamash maline. So it comes to teach us that the mar is actually a type of yarak, and since it's a type of yarak, it could be planted kalacha in one aruga. So Mar says, Zraim salkadaitach. You would have thought that mar was a type of zera, but tanan yurakis. It says, if you remember the Mishnah, it says eilu yurakis. These are the yurakis. These are the vegetable a person can use. It says clear in the Mishnah that mar is a yarak. So even without Rav, we wouldn't have thought that mar is a type of zera. So just by the Mishnah we know it's yurakis, and yurakis we know is more lenient than zerayim. So if zerayim can be planted in one aruga for sure, the yurakis, the mar would be able to be planted in one aruga. So Tani Bar Kapar Yurakis, we also have a brisa from Bar Kapar that says Yurakis, but Tani Shmuel also Yurakis. We have many sources that it's called Yurakis. So Mar answers like this: Chazeres itzruchalei. Rab was telling us that you're allowed to plant even the chazeras in this aruga. Since the chazeras will eventually become harder, and when it hardens, it becomes thicker. Therefore, it needs more space. Because Lav Amar Rabbi Yosef Rechinina. Because did not Rabbi Yosef Rechinina say that if you have the stalk of a kruv that becomes hard, you need to give it more space, the space of a base raiva. So what do we see? Just like by the kruv, which is what's a kruv? Cabbage. Just like by cabbage, you give extra space because eventually it's going to become hard. So I would have thought also by the chasa or by the chazeres, the lettuce, since it's eventually going to get hard, you should give extra space. Kamash malan. So that's what Rab's telling us. The chazeres could also be planted kalacha in that area of an aruga, and it's not a problem of kalayim.
Until it gets hard, then you have to make space.
Well, once it gets hard, I think it's not any more nourishing from the ground. It's ruined already, so it might not be a problem of kalayim once it's making it worse. Possibly. By the way, the reason why it's okay when it's in the 4 perimeters is because they're so distant from each other. They're not gonna take nourishment from each other. They're far enough that they're not gonna have nourishment. That's the idea.
Everything is filled but filled.
Right. So it could be that by the lettuce, even when it gets harder, maybe just more simpler interpretation is that even when it gets harder, it's still not going to have a unique. It's not going to have that nourishment for the other vegetables. Therefore, it's not a problem. Even though the kurov, it seems like when it gets harder, it will take nourishment from the other vegetables or the other zeraim around it. It needs to be at a farther distance. Okay. Okay, so we said in the Mishnah that the marar, you're able to use the mother whether it's moist or whether it's dried. So that's referring to the stalk. that we don't. If the stalk of mar is dry or the stalk is moist, you're able to use it. By the leaves, they need to be moist, but if they're dry, it's not kosher. And the reason is, as Rashi explains, because once they're dry, they are like dirt. Like they don't have any taste anymore. They're like dirt. So the stalk again can be dry or moist, but the leaves only when they're moist. So the Gemara asks, "Hamiktanti seifa bekelach shalahem b'chalal the reisha alin." He says, if you read the Mishnah again, it starts up with these are the vegetables you could use, and then it says what are the vegetables they could be wet or dry, but not like cooked or overcooked, and they all join up to be one kazayas. And then it says you could also use the kelach, you also use the stalk. So that the implication is that kalach is a chiddush, that you're able to use the kalach. But when we mentioned earlier in the Mishnah, whether it's dry or whether it's moist, that's referring just to the leaf. And then we say not only can you use the leaf, which is dry or moist, you're even able to use the kalach, the stalk. So the Gemara says no. The Mishnah is explaining that then we said earlier in the Mishnah that the mar can be used whether it's moist or whether it's dry. That's referring to specifically the kalach. So the chiddush of the Mishnah is not telling you that kalach is able to be used, but rather the chiddush of the Mishnah is telling us that kalach can be used whether dry or whether it's wet. Okay. Meisvei. Yoitz behem ubekalach shaham bein lach meivation. You can be yotzi them with them or with their stalk, whether they're dry or moist. So it says clearly them or their stalk. So what's behan? That's probably the leaves. And it says clear whether they're dry or wet. He disagrees in general. He says you can only use it when they're moist, but you version in. But when they're dry, you will not be able to fulfill your obligation. And they both agree that whether if they're withered, meaning they're a bit old and a bit withery, I guess the leaves, you're still able to use it. Aval like vushim v'lashlukim v'leimu but not when they're pickled, overcooked, or regularly cooked. Klala shadava. This is the rule. Kol sheish b'tamar yitzma. Whatever has the taste of mar, you fulfill your obligation. Kol she'eim by tamar ein yitzma. But if it doesn't have the taste, you don't fulfill your obligation. So if it's pickled or cooked, or for that matter probably steamed or any of these things that you're changing the taste of the mar, you will not fulfill your obligation. So Tirguma akalach. So the Gemara explains that when Rameir says that you're yotzi with them or with the kalach, whether it's wet or moist, when it says wet or moist, that's only going on kalach. Meaning is don't take it back to the behen uba kalach. It's only you should put like a comma. Yotzi behem comma or kalach shalahem ben lachem innovation. And then so once the next clause would be with the stalk, whether they're wet or dry. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan. You do not fulfill your obligation when they are withered. So that's again, that would obviously be disagreeing with Rameir Chaim that they both agreed you could use it when it's withered. But Rabbi Tzadok would be like Rameir Chaim that says you could use it when it is kemushim. Boy Rabbi Bar Chama. Can a person fulfill his obligation with mar that comes from Ma'aser Sheni while you're in Yerushalayim? The problem is, as we mentioned earlier, that these items, matzah, mar, they need to be able to be eaten wherever a person lives. So Ma'aser Sheni can only be eaten in Yerushalayim. So could mar of Ma'aser Sheni, which can only be eaten in Yerushalayim, could you use that mar even when you're in Yerushalayim? Says according to Rabbi Kiva, loiti bailach. That's not a question. Because hashda matzah daraisa nafik mamar darbami bai. He says we already mentioned earlier that Rabbi Kiva says matzah is mutter. If you remember, because he says since you could, if it becomes tameh, you could redeem the matzah, and then you could eat it anywhere you want. So since theoretically it could become tameh and you could eat it wherever you want, that's good enough. So if matzah, which is Ma'aser Sheni, could be used because it could be eaten anywhere, so for sure mar, which is only a din d'Rabbanan, meaning is Ma'aser Sheni of mar is a din d'Rabbanan because Ma'aser Sheni is only by the chitim, is not by grains. By the vegetables, that's only a din d'Rabbanan. So for sure you would be able to use it. So the question would really be according to Rabbi Yosef Glili. So would it be that matzah That's a deraisa, as we mentioned. The ma'aser sheni by matzah is a deraisa. To that, it would not work because midaraisa you're not allowed to eat it anywhere outside of Yerushalayim. Avol marar midaraisa you are able to eat it wherever you want. It's only midarabanan you can't eat it outside of Yerushalayim. Therefore, you should fulfill your obligation. Or maybe when the Rabbi made tikana, they made it always similar to din deraisa. So if the din deraisa of ma'aser sheni you would not be able to use it for matzah. So same thing would be by the din d'rabbanan by mar that you should not be able to use it for matzah. So Amar Rava mistaber matzah mar. Rava says it makes sense that matzah mar have the same halachas because there's a hekesh between them, and just like by matzah it has the shem of ma'aser sheni and you not fulfill your obligation. Also mar would also have the shem ma'aser sheni and you do not fulfill your obligation. So just do the Mishnah. He says, Ein Sharin, and a little bit of the Mar. Ein Sharin is a Mursin l'tarna goyim. We do not soak Mursin. Mursin is bran.
Oat bran.
Oat bran. You do not soak oat bran for the tarna goyim because there's a chashash, it will turn into chametz. Abel cholten. But you are allowed to scorch them. Meaning is you take the oat bran and you throw it into the hot water. A woman should not soak the morsin, which was the oat bran. She should take it to her hand. There's some type of cleanser, some type of oat cleanser, so she would soak it, then use it as a rub. But what she could do is she could rub it against her flesh while it's dry. And Rashi explains that even though her flesh might be still wet from the bath, and it'll get a bit wet, but we're not choishes for that. A person is not allowed to chew wheat and put it on his makkah because it will become chametz. So you wouldn't be able to do that. Tana Rabbanim. These are items that do not become chametz. Ha'afoi, something which is baked. If it's baked, right, so when it's completely baked, even if you would soak it in, well, the reason of gebrachs is actually, you'll see in the source in the Gemara in a moment, is because we're scared that there's parts of the flour which weren't baked, right? That's where gebrachs comes from. But theoretically, if it was completely baked, then it wouldn't be a problem, right? That's why they say the gebrachs came more of an issue when they started making the flat matzahs, because when they started making the flat matzah, the flour stopped getting as much kneaded into the, like when it was thicker, it was much easier, I think, to knead the flour into it. It became much thinner, like there's little pieces that could fall on it, and you wouldn't see it. So it became more of an issue just a few hundred years ago when they changed to the thin matzahs. If it's cooked, there's no problem. And also, if you scorched it with boiling water. So Gemara says, cooking flour, I mean, once you're cooking it, once you're it's turning into chametz while you're cooking it. So Amar Papa it means is you baked it first, you baked into matzah, and then you take the matzah and you cook it inside water, then it's not a problem. Tanya Rabbi Yosef Yehuda Aimer. Here, kamach shenaf l'toich DAF afilu kikol yam kulai, a flour that was drips of water were falling onto it the entire day. Any bali de chametz will not become chametz. And Amar Papi qualifies. What does that mean? When it's one drop after the next drop, it's not gonna turn into chametz because the constant dripping stops. It doesn't let it ferment. Amad Debei Rabbi Shila, vatika shari. Vatika is mutter. So what is vatika? So Rashi explains it's a type of flour dish. So he says vatika is mutter. Vatanya vatika asa. But we have another brayz that says vatika is aser. So like kasha hada avim mimishcha milcha hada avim mimaya v'nocha. The tikka, which is mutter, is if it's made with oil and flour. But when it's made, oil and salt. But when it's made with water and salt, then obviously it's also because it could be a problem of chametz. Omar Zutra, loy limcha inish kader bekamcha da avishna. A person should not make make a dish with kabach, with flour, which was put into the oven. What happened over here? Basically, they would thicken their foods with flour, but this flour was already dried inside of the oven. So it's what's called koli. They take the kernels, or they take the flour, and they dry it in the oven. So since it's baked already, this flour has no chash of becoming chametz. As mentioned earlier, if it's baked. there's no problem of chametz. But still, Mar Zutra says this flour, which has no chash of turning chametz, you're not allowed to thicken your cooked foods with it. Why? Because maybe you didn't cook this flour well enough, and therefore when you put it into the kaira, it's going to turn into chametz. Right? And you're not putting it in, and this dish wasn't a hot dish. It wasn't roiteach, wasn't boiling hot, so you're scalding it, so you're putting in this flour, which maybe wasn't baked enough, that it shouldn't be able to turn into chametz. When you put it in, it will turn into chametz. So this is a little bit of the source of gebrachs. Because even when you put the matzah, which has the flour on it, which might have flour on it, which wasn't kneaded in, and you put it into the oven, and it's baking, if it's baked, it's not a problem. Because maybe the flour which was on top of the matzah didn't bake 100%, and then when you pour water on it, it could still turn into chametz.